This video is a complete course on XYZ Mesh version 10 from beginning to end and covers every single aspect and feature inside of the application. This is meant as a full training course for anyone who is interested and comprises of all of our individual videos in one setting. So without further ado, hope you enjoy the training course. Hello, I'm Kyle, the creator of XYZ Mesh. XYZ Mesh is an application used for plotting XYZ data inside of Microsoft Excel with Microsoft Excel formatted graphs and visual representations in some other exports as well. This is the first video in our series of videos where I'm going to be stepping you through how to use XYZ Mesh and showing you its full potential. If you would like to follow along with this series of videos, XYZ Mesh does offer a full functional evaluation period of 5 days with every downloaded copy. If you'd like to download a copy and follow along with us, the download is going to be in the description down below. In today's video, I will focus on the basics: how to get started with XYZ Mesh, how to install and how to view data, and how to export your data in some simple formats. XYZ Mesh is an application that takes XYZ data and plots that data in a 3D surface. That surface can then be exported into multiple formats, all of which are contained inside of their own file. In simple terms, XYZ Mesh exports files that can be shared and viewed by anyone with a compatible machine or version of Microsoft Excel. Unlike other graphing applications, no extra software is required or add-ins needed for the receiver to view your data and interact with it. These exported formats include Microsoft Excel with meshes, surface graphs, line graphs, wire plots, and scatter plots, as well as CSV documents and text-based databases, and even a fully interactive 3D environment, new to version 10. But we will get to all that in a later video. For now, just know that XYZ Mesh's main selling point is the ability to share your plots with pretty much anyone. And the best part of it is there's no programming required or any large learning curve involved. As mentioned before, XYZ Mesh version 10 comes with a fully functional 5-day evaluation period before the standard trial is activated. This evaluation period allows users to obtain and try out all the features of XYZ Mesh before they purchase to see if the product is the right purchase for them. To obtain your free copy of XYZ Mesh, navigate to the main site and scroll down until you see the black border box that reads "Download your trial." Input your information, or if you would rather not, just type in a fake email and your link will be generated. It should be known that it's a very common issue for virus scan applications to automatically assume that any application downloaded from the internet is a potential virus. These protection protocols often do not scan the entire file. Instead, they just see that it's an application and that it did not come from a larger company like Microsoft. If you are ever in doubt about an online file containing something unsafe, you can use this free online scan called VirusTotal. This is a free online service that can be used to scan any document and check if it contains anything malicious. This online service will send this file through up to 70 different virus scan applications and protocols to ensure that it is safe. Now, from my testing, it is common for 1 to 10 flags to come back positive while using this virus scan. These are typically associated with AI scanners and often come back as false positives because they are based off of either the amount of times a file has been downloaded or just the fact that it is an application in general. Please do not install anything that you do not feel safe installing. Always consult with your IT personnel or professional if you are in a company or organization before you do anything on a machine, especially a machine that is not yours. Once you downloaded the file from our website, you will notice that it is contained in a zip document. Go ahead and extract the document and run the installer. In some cases, you might need to run the application under administrative privileges, as it really depends on your computer security settings if you'll need to do this or not. Install as normal, and once installed, XYZ Mesh will activate the 5-day full product evaluation. Now that you have XYZ Mesh installed, what do you do with it? First, you are going to need a series of XYZ data. If you do not have some sample data for this, you can obtain some on our website. Right above the trial download, you will see a download link for some of our sample files. Select your XYZ data from your spreadsheet viewer and copy it. Once copied, go back to XYZ Mesh. With the cell highlighted, right-click on the cell and select Paste from the mouse menu. You will now see your data populate and a graph appear on the right side of the screen showing your new data points. Just like everything else in XYZ Mesh, the visible plot is simple to operate. Intuitive mouse controls allow you to drag and drop and rotate the graph in three-dimensional space. The rotation commands can be controlled with either the left or right mouse click. Use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. To pan, hold down on the left and right click buttons to drag the graph to the direction you would like to pan. There are several other types of graphs that XYZ Mesh can produce, but we will get to those in a moment. For now, just know that simple scatter plots is not the limitations of XYZ Mesh. Now that we have the XYZ data graphing, what can we do with it? Well, there are several options. First, let's start with the most simple, a mesh conversion. Once the data is placed inside of XYZ Mesh, simply click the Convert to Mesh button and watch as your data is converted into a mesh format. When converting to mesh, your new data will appear on the right in a brand new data table. There are lots of things going on in the background when these calculations are run, and we will cover them in a later video. For now, the only settings that really matter to us is the complete curve and the auto adjust decimal. These two settings are on by default, and what they do is guarantee that the plot you generate will have no empty gaps or spaces in between the data points. From here, the logical path would be to take the converted data and export it into a graph that we can share. For instance, a Microsoft Excel surface graph. To do this, click Export to Excel. A new window will appear that will give you the option for company branding. All tiers of the Excel Draw license will allow you to export your data into Excel. However, only the higher business tier of licensing will allow you to put in company branding. Input your information as needed or leave it blank, and when ready, click Export and wait as all your data is processed into an Excel document with the selected graph populated. Interpolation is the ability to curve data and fill in empty data points without converting the data to mesh first. For instance, say you want to keep your data in an XYZ format, but you still want to generate new points and fill in any empty gaps that there might be in your data. That is called interpolation. If you want to keep your data in an XYZ format, but you still want to fill in the empty data points, just click the Interpolate button. This will take longer for the more data points you have. However, the data will be filled in and any empty gaps will be curved. When the data is completed, a window will appear asking you if you'd like to save the converted data into a CSV. By default, the original data will not be overwritten. However, if your goal is to keep the data inside of XYZ Mesh and possibly do something else with it, you are going to want to check mark the auto interpolation. Having this option turned on will make interpolated data automatically overwrite the original data in the Input tab. Excel scatterplots can be created by exporting data that has not been converted into mesh. This can either be data that you just pasted into XYZ Mesh or data that you have interpolated. Either way, when ready, click the Export button. You will notice that there are still options for company branding, but now there are other options for graphs, specifically line or scatter plots. Let's select scatter plot and then export to Excel. Shortly, an Excel document will open with the new scatter plot visible. You can also adjust the rotations and the X, Y, and Z walls inside of this Excel document. And this functionality also extends to the end user or the person that you send this Excel document to. They can also manipulate the rotations and the X, Y, and Z walls as well. CelTools. CelTools is a comprehensive add-in for Microsoft Excel that makes Excel easier to use. With features like name swapping, random number generation, and even helping you navigate VLOOKUPs and creating VLOOKUP tables for you. CelTools is your one-stop shop for all kinds of things inside of Microsoft Excel. Try it out today and you'll be wondering how you ever navigated Microsoft Excel without it. Importing your data into XYZ Mesh is simple. XYZ Mesh has an intuitive copy and paste functionality. Copy your data from any data table program, like Excel, and paste it into XYZ Mesh's Input tab. Automatically, your data will be plotted and you will see a 3D rendering of your points on the right. You may notice that your input window has a set number of rows. These rows can be adjusted manually or automatically. To adjust manually, type in the desired number of rows you would need for your data into the rows text box and click Update/Clear Row Count. All data in the input box will be cleared and your rows will be updated to reflect the number that you indicated in the box. By default, the rows will automatically update when pasting in new data. However, this option is a little bit slower as it requires XYZ Mesh to count copied rows and make adjustments before the data is pasted. By default, this option is left on, but you can toggle this setting off underneath the Input tab grid window. If you'd like to create more data points from your XYZ data or fill in empty gaps with curved data, simply click Interpolate. This will loop through and create XYZ data for any of the empty gaps that might have been in your original data set. If you would like to convert to a mesh, click Convert to Mesh, and watch as your data is converted into a mesh format ready for Excel or other graphing applications. If you'd like to create a complex 3D rendering of your surface with models and assets, click 3D Surface Render. You will see a new window where you can specify your assets, textures, and other variations such as paths. We will be covering this part in a later portion as it requires more explanation to fully grasp. But if you would like to create a fast render, just click Preview and watch as your interactive surface is created. XYZ Mesh has a lot of conversion options available to the user, and keeping with the ease of use ideals expressed so far in the application, XYZ Mesh has all of these features just a single click away. Everything you need to have set up should be on by default, but I'm going to explain these settings so you have a better idea as to what you need. The first setting you want to look at is the curving function. Curving data is taking empty data points that may exist when converting from XYZ into another format and filling those empty gaps in with calculated values. These values are dependent on ranges from the known points to help predict what empty points might contain. XYZ Mesh has three settings for curving. The first, which is selected by default, is called Complete Curve. This will loop continuously and perform hundreds of passes to make sure that all data points are filled in before the graph is completed. This option does take a bit longer to complete, but produces the best results. Second is called a fast curve. A fast curve sends the data through a minimal amount of passes needed to generate a complete enough graph version of your data. Sometimes this could be a completed curve, but many times corners may not be calculated while the center part of the graph is. The last option for curving is single points. Single points will only use the points available in the Input tab and not create new data points. This is good if you would like to plot your data as is, but if your goal is a completed 3D surface graph, you might get undesirable results. When graphing in a mesh format, not all data plotters read meshes the same way. Excel, for instance, assumes and expects each data point to be evenly dispersed. If the mesh data Excel is plotting has a tightly condensed set of data and then a data set spaced further apart, it will plot this data as if it was all spaced evenly, resulting in a poor depiction of the data. Theoretical points is an option that will allow XYZ Mesh to calculate distances between points. This results in a more accurate depiction when exporting to Excel. Interpolation will allow you to create curved XYZ data without first converting the data to mesh. By default, XYZ Mesh will ask you if you would like to export the data to a CSV or replace the original input data set. With auto interpolation turned on, this process will be automated and automatically replace the original data, thus removing a step in the conversion process. While converting your data, decimal points play a crucial role in determining how large your final exported data set will be. This can be set manually next to the manual update graph button or automatically set with the auto adjust decimal option. With this option selected, your data will automatically be processed and calculated to the highest value data set possible that is still within the Excel maximum limit of 255 by 255, or just over 65,000 data points. Sometimes you will need to overlay your original data on top of your converted data. Selecting Show Origin Path will transpose a line graph over top of your converted mesh data. This option will only work on mesh data, as if you interpolate data, the newly created data points overwrite the original, thus just putting you a line graph over all the points you have plotted anyway. Sorting is a setting that we recommend you do not adjust. There are two options for this: auto, which is turned on by default, and do not sort. Auto sort will automatically line up your data in the correct format for proper graphing. However, there are some cases where sorting data is not ideal. For those instances, you can choose do not sort, which will keep data in the same orientation as it was entered. However, the graphed data may not be accurately represented in a standard graphing format. New in version 10 is the ability to use your computer's graphics processing unit, or GPU, to run calculations. Previously, XYZ Mesh used the GPU for only graphing and focused the bulk of the conversion on your CPU or your computer's processing unit. The advantage of using the GPU over the CPU is a much faster conversion time and the ability to process many calculations at once. The downside is that the GPU cannot process the mathematical calculations quite as efficiently as the CPU does. However, this is only noticeable whenever you are curving or creating hundreds of data points from only a handful of original points. The GPU processing will give you quicker results. However, the CPU processing will give you more accurate results. Reversing the way a graph shows on the axis can be done at any time. By default, reverse X is left on. This is due to the way that mesh format data is laid out, with X being reversed from the standard graphs. This is the same for all mesh formatted data regardless of the graphing application. Unless specifically needed, leave reverse X on. The other options reverse the axes on their own specific axes, and it can be shown in the graph whenever you click on any of the reverse axes options. The Ultimate Excel Cheat Sheet Bundle Pack. This is a collection of 7 double-sided PDFs that you can print off and keep at your desk to help you with all kinds of functions inside of Excel. It's also a great way to support the channel because we sell it directly on our website and it only costs $5. So if you'd like to support the channel, go ahead, jump over to the link in the description and download a copy today. The visible plot is simple to operate. Intuitive mouse controls allow you to drag and drop and rotate the graph in 3-dimensional space. The rotation commands can be controlled with either the left or right mouse click. Use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. To pan, hold down on the left and right click buttons to drag the graph to the direction you would like to pan. XYZ Mesh allows for splicing data at any of the 3 axes. This option is available in all conversions for the Z axis, but only mesh conversions can splice in the X and Y. To perform a splice, adjust the sliders under the graph. This will visually remove data at a spliced location. This is only visual and no data is actually removed. As a side note, some export formats do allow for splicing, while others do not. This is something that we will cover in a later video, but it is something to keep in mind. XYZ Mesh is pretty good at guessing how to properly scale Z data to accurately represent plotted information. However, sometimes the data might not be scaled just right. To adjust the scale of the data manually, deselect Auto Scale and the slider above the setting will become enabled. From here, adjust the scales as needed to more accurately represent the data you are plotting. While this will not affect Excel exports, as Excel will override all scaling factors anyway, it will affect the 3D rendering and model creation if you choose to export into that format. An origin is a center point in which the plot is rotated and zoomed into. If you'd like to lock the origin in place so that it is always centered, enable the Link Origin option. Now, no matter how much you rotate or pan, the graph will stay centered. New to version 10 is the ability to show the minimum and maximum values being plotted on the graph itself. When turned on, labels will appear in the areas around the plot to better visualize what the minimum and maximum values are. While plotting lines, grids, or points, the size of the data points can be adjusted by selecting the size in the drop-down menu under the plot. The color option is used for adjusting the main color of the plot. By default, this setting does nothing as the more colorful percentage-based value coloring is enabled. This is an option we will cover in more detail later, but this can be turned off in the menu settings for the graph. Display, color effects, lighting, and shading. Toggling this on, you can now change the main color of the plot with the color drop-down selector. This option allows you to change the default color of the original path. The original path option is one that we covered in the previous video, which will overlay the original input data over top of your mesh conversion. This option will also change the color of the points selected from the Select Points options, something we'll cover in another video. The border color is an option from the main menu. This will bring up a border around your data so you can easily see if all the data points are visible within a viewable area. The border can be turned on in Display, Visual Effects, and Border Box. When enabled, you can adjust the color of the bordering box with this drop-down selection. As I've mentioned to you before, we pride ourselves in making things as easy as possible. Part of that comes from having options easily accessible, just like the buttons at the bottom of the graphing window. I will be covering these rather quickly as most are pretty straightforward and we have covered them once before in another video. Copy All allows you to copy all the data in the converted grid. Copy to XYZ will copy the converted data grid into an XYZ format instead of a mesh format. Add in steps will add in X and Y values in specific locations, basically like a theoretical points calculation, but after the conversion is completed. Clear will clear out all data in the converted grid. And finally, Optimize for Excel will reduce the amount of points in a mesh format to comply with Excel limitations. You can also run this function to reduce the plot down to a specific number of points if needed. DXF Reader GT. DXF Reader GT is an application that allows you to open DXF files and view all the contents inside of it, then break it down and give you all the XYZ data in a nice little spreadsheet for you. It's super easy to use. Fire up DXF Reader GT, and if the DXF document is in a compatible format, all of your information will be loaded for you. You can try DXF Reader out for free today by going to the link in the description down below, or you can use this promo code to get an additional 15% off. To export your data to a CSV, go to File, Export to CSV. Depending on if you interpolated your data or converted your data with Mesh, you will either be picking to export the input data or the converted data. In the same way you exported to CSV, you can choose to copy your input or converted data into your clipboard. Inside the main menu, go to Edit, and choose which of the settings you'd like to copy. If you want to copy your converted data, but you want to keep it in an XYZ format, you can use the button underneath the converted data, Copy to XYZ. When exporting to DXF format, you have three options with either the input or the converted data. Inside of the XYZ Mesh main menu, go to File, and then select Export to DXF in either one of your dataset series. From here, you can see points, lines, or points and lines. Points will export your data as a series of points, and lines as a series of lines. If you choose points and lines, then you will have a layer of points as well as a layer of lines. As we covered before, Excel and XYZ Mesh has different options for data based on how the items were converted. With interpolation and standard input data, XYZ Mesh can create 3D lines or 3D scatter plots with Excel. If you converted to a mesh, a surface, wireframe, or heat graph can be created. Either way, the steps are the same. Once your data is converted into the desired format, click the Export to Excel button. A new window will appear with branding options for business and corporate tier products. For regular users or personal license tiers, these options will be grayed out. If you would like this information to be exported, fill in the information and check mark that you would like to include these brandings. The information entered will automatically be saved and will repopulate the next time the window is brought up. For mesh exports, there are a couple unique options aside from the graphing types. Major units is the ability to set intervals of the units used inside of Excel when graphing your surface. Typically, this is used to adjust scaling, but it's easier to manipulate this inside of Excel after exporting, as you can visibly see the changes when you make them. Include graph transparencies removes the background of the graph so the plot can be overlaid on top of an image or another plot. XYZ Mesh comes with the option for users to browse for an image to use as the background of their plot. Typically, this is done with Google Earth screenshots, but pictures of other things can also be used as well. It should be noted that when you do overlay a chart over top of an image, for instance, like from Google Earth screenshot, it will take some manual adjustment to make sure that the plots line up perfectly. For 3D lines and scatter plots, the user has a unique option to lock boundaries. Locking boundaries allowed for the 3D scatter plots to be zoomed in. However, not all sets of data are compatible with this feature, like latitude and longitude. as the variation from X and Y values are too great for a zoom property to work inside of Excel. For this reason, we leave the option turned off by default. When ready, select your option for export and click Export to Excel. After a little bit of time, a new Excel document will open with your exported data, branding, and your graph created. XYZ Mesh project files are unique file formats that can be opened inside of XYZ Mesh. The project file contains input data and converted data with a few settings unique to each project. To save a project file, go to XYZ Mesh's main menu, select File, and Save As. With business and corporate tier licensed products, encrypted project files are added as a way to lock projects to a specific company. With the encrypted project file, only users within your company with the company activation license can open and view the project. Project files can also be used to compare two plots together with the compare window, something that we'll cover in another video. New to version 10 is the ability to export an interactive 3D rendering of your surface. To export into an interactive 3D surface, you first need to have your data either interpolated or converted to a mesh. Once the conversion is done, click 3D Render Export. The first group of settings we're going to look at is how the user interacts with the plot itself. Gravity can be enabled or disabled depending on what you would like the viewer to do, such as if you'd like to imitate falling or jumping, you can turn gravity on. Collision will make the surface a solid object so as to not allow the viewer to pass through it. Surface makes a surface appear. It should be noted that collision will only be functional if the surface is enabled. Points will show the individual points of the XYZ values themselves, and they will be displayed as spheres in your 3D rendering. Color will allow the points to be specifically colored to the exact same color as the plot inside of XYZ Mesh, so you can better understand what point lines up with what section. The Z height scale is a pass-through from the auto scale function inside of the main plot. However, sometimes the scale in 3D rendering can be a bit off. You can use this scale to either increase or decrease the Z height as needed. Below the scaling is a drop-down menu for the main texture of the surface. Changing this selection will update the main graph on the right. This surface texture will be overlaid for the surface once it is exported. The next set of inputs are where you can really start customizing your surface. XYZ Mesh's interactive 3D render software allows the user to input a total of 3 different textures for paths and up to 10 different item models. These textures are on layers 1 through 3, and the models are on layers 4 through 13. Now, the first thing you may notice when looking down here is that you can change the object layer. And if you do that, you will notice that the object over on the right is updated as well. Now, if we go to layer 3, you're going to see that it still has textures, but as soon as we move to layer 4, you're going to see an object. That is because, like I mentioned, from layer 4 to 13 is objects that you can place, while 1 through 3 are textures for paths. So I'm going to go ahead and select layer 1. You will also notice that right here, the layer name says Path 01. You can customize this to any name that you want. And when you do, it will also update the path name that you chose over on the right. So if we want to name this green, it'll help us because we're going to now change this to a green metal rust color. So whenever we put this down, it's going to appear as a green texture. And I'm going to change the main background texture so we can see this a little bit better. So now that we have our layer selected, as well as a custom name for the layer, how do we use this as a path? Or how do we draw the path on there? If you take your mouse over the graph on the right, you can see that your mouse coordinates now change to reflect the X and Y values that is currently over. If you click and drag while you have your layer selected, you'll be able to make a path going wherever you would like on this chart. I am clicking and holding and dragging to place the points. Whenever your point falls inside of one of the squares in the mesh, it will change that texture, or it will put a new texture over top of that square in the color or the texture path that you have chosen. So it makes a path going from here all the way down. Now, before we get any further into this, I'm going to go ahead and click preview so we can see what it looks like. I'm also going to turn off gravity so we can be floating. So I'm going to go ahead and hit preview. It's going to load up. And as you can see, we now have a path going from one side all the way down to the other. You also may notice that there are a few areas like this right here that have little squares. To fix this, you can adjust the asset tolerance right here to make it go a little bit higher up. When you do that, it will bring all the textures up just a little bit to better fill in those gaps. You also may notice that whenever we clicked and dragged points, it was added to this little spreadsheet down here. This spreadsheet will tell you the layer name, and the asset associated with it. Now, the reason why this is important is if you change this asset without changing the layer number, it will change it for all the objects and points on that layer. And this is not just the thing with paths, this is also the same thing with models and assets that way too. So if we go to preview, we are now no longer going to have a green path, we're going to have a path that has muddy leaves on it. So why is that important? Well, if we change down here to layer 4, which is our first object with models in it, we can change this to trees, and we can select one of the many trees that we have available. So let's go down and select this tree. And I'm just going to place a tree here, there, and I'm going to make a smiley face going around like that. So now we have a string of trees and a smiley face. Let's go ahead and hit preview. And as you can see, we now have a set of trees with a smiley face. Now, the reason why I told you that it's important to remember your layers and your layer names is because it's very easy to get carried away and just say, okay, I already placed that tree. Now I need this tree down, and I'm going to draw some of these trees over here in a frowny face. And if you do that without changing the layer, you are also going to be updating your original trees as well. So it's important that you remember what layer you're on and make sure to keep that layer the same. So what happens whenever you add layers or you add points on there that you really don't need anymore, or you don't want? Well, if you know where the points are, for instance, we know that these points right here, you can see that they are selected whenever we select these. I can go up here and say, okay, I know that it is all these points. I can select all them. As you can see, they're selected, and I can just delete with my keyboard, and now they're all gone. Now, you may have noticed that just clicking and dragging is quite tedious, and if you wanted to fill in a large area, it could be very time consuming. So let's say that you want to add in these rocks and you're just placing rocks here and there. If you just want a random assortment of rocks, that is where jitter placement comes in. You can turn this on and you can use this little slider to increase the range, and what that is going to do, it is going to randomly place a bunch of rocks in that area or whatever item you have selected. That way when you drag and drop, you can see all those rocks were added in. If you increase the jitter up, you can see that now it's going to place it in a much wider field, and I'm just clicking and dragging. So now that we have the model created, let's explain how to maneuver around your created scene. If you go to preview, you can bring up a preview image of your rendered environment, and I'm going to teach you how to operate this window. As you can see over on the left hand side, there are instructions on different things that you can do. Move, WASD, which is the standard movement control for any video game that's on a computer. W will move you forward, A will move you backward, S to the left, and D to the right. If you hold shift while you are moving, it will move you faster, kind of like a run button would do. To move your camera around, it doesn't matter if you right click or left click, but just click on the screen and drag your mouse, and that will allow you to move your camera in any direction. If you'd like to go up or down, so vertical, you can either do E to go up or Q to go down. A setting that is available for you to toggle on and off at any point is the gravity and collision. To turn gravity on, simply click G. And when you click G, you'll notice that you fall down to your surface. While walking around, if you go over an incline that you cannot quite get up, you can click spacebar to jump. And if at any time you feel like that you would like to go faster or slower, the mouse wheel, whenever you increase it, as you can see right here, when you roll the mouse wheel up, it will increase your speed. When you lower the mouse wheel down, it will decrease your speed. Another toggled on option is the collision. So collision is C, and I'm going to show you this because if for whatever reason your character passes through the floor or goes so far beyond the surface, it will automatically respawn above the surface and fall back through again, as you can see right there. So to stop this from going on infinitely and just continually building up speed till you hit terminal velocity, just hit C and you'll land right back on the surface again. But how does this benefit your customers? Well, if you go to Export 3D Viewer, you're going to have an option to export your exact interactive 3D model into a project that you can then share with your customer or whoever is going to be viewing it. And all you have to do, export 3D Viewer and then give it a name. So sample name, it's creating it, and now it populated it right here. And there's your project called sample name. Here's all the assets that go along with your file. And if we run this, you're going to see that that is your project file. This folder right here is contained wherever you saved it at, which is right here, and it's not going to be small enough to email, but it is possible for you to upload this to, say, your Google Drive or something like that, or a file upload server, and then you can share it that way with whoever you would like. There are no extra software requirements for this product to run. Basically, if it will run on your machine, it will run on the person who is receiving it. However, you cannot just take this and put it somewhere else. It has to have the assets folder in the same directory as your export. ExcelDraw. ExcelDraw is a Microsoft Excel add-in that will allow you to open and even create CAD style type drawings inside of Microsoft Excel with no extra CAD applications required. You can try it for free today with the link in the description, and if you decide to purchase, you can use this promo code here to get 20% off your purchase. If you click on File, you're going to see some of the things we've previously covered, such as the exporting options and some of the input options as well. You're also going to see the Create/New or Clear, and this is going to basically do the same thing as the Update/Clear row count that we covered in the previous video, where it just empties out the input data and clears it out for you. Next, if you go over to Edit, you're going to see the copy options that we covered previously, as well as a Clear All. A Clear All will clear all the data from all of the charts and leave you with a fresh opening of XYZ Mesh. The last thing in the edit menu is the decimal input type. Now, by default, this is set to period being the decimal point, as we are located in America, and that is the decimal point that we use in the US. However, you can change it to a comma input. New to version 10 is the auto detect decimal, which will automatically detect and see if you're using commas or periods, and will adjust the calculations for whichever one you input. Now, this is turned on by default, but you can toggle this off if it is not working, or if you would just like to manually put it in as commas and leave it that way forever. Now, it should be noted that all the settings that we are going over today, as well as everything we covered previously, is saved in a settings document that is then reopened every time that XYZ Mesh opens. Therefore, it remembers your settings. The next options we're going to look at are the auto convert, which will automatically convert your data from an XYZ input into a mesh format if you so choose to do that. You can also have auto update cells, which will automatically update the cells whenever you type them in here to display on the main graph. The information window is something we will cover later, but it will bring up information on the plot that you have currently generated. The information includes slope and angles and averages, as well as individual points at certain locations. Pretty much all the information about your converted grid is displayed in the information window. The next thing we're going to look at, which is a new improvement in version 10, is the color theme. I personally prefer the dark color theme. However, for the purpose of this video, I have been leaving this on the default. However, I'm going to now change it over to dark. So if you go to Options, Color Theme, and Dark, it will update everything to a darker mode for you. Now, the next option we're going to be looking at is called a compare window. This will require you to have two separate XYZ Mesh project files saved on your computer, so then you can open them and compare them side by side. So inside the options, go to compare mesh, and now you can load in your first file. So we're going to load in this file that we have here. And as you can see, we have it loaded in. We are now going to load in the exact same file just for comparison, but you can upload a different file if you so choose to. And now you see that we have two graphs plotting exactly the same. And if we expand this out, you can see the data for each one of the plots. We can also adjust if we want to offset this in the X or Y. So if we offset this by X, it'll swap it around, and we can change the spacing between the two as well. So that puts it further apart, while this brings it close together. Makes it a little bit easier for you to see the differences between the graphs. Next, we're going to be looking at the help menu. Inside the help menu, the first tab is the About page. The first option is XYZ Mesh. If you open this up, it's going to bring up a window that is going to check for updates, as well as give you information about the current version of XYZ Mesh that you are running. If you had any updates available, not only would this window come up automatically whenever you opened up XYZ Mesh, it will check for updates every 10 days. But if there was an update available, you would see this window and it would tell you right here what the update was, as well as what was changed in the latest update. On this window, you can also directly download the latest update by clicking this button, which will bring you to a page that will allow you to download it, or you can go directly to the main web page of XYZ Mesh, which typically outlines the new features whenever you are upgrading from an older version to a newer version. Inside a help about an OpenTK or OpenGL is the documentation and information window regarding the plotting graph that we have on the right. Because XYZ Mesh uses OpenGL, which is actually packaged inside of OpenTK, which is used for the platform that we are currently running XYZ Mesh in. Below the About page is the support, and support will simply bring up a window for you so you can see what email to email our support at. I would also like to explain that we do not offer tech support over phone. We only offer tech support via email. So that email address is who you need to contact, and I'm going to be your contact person, which is Kyle. The next option down is going to be the tutorial window, which offers a very quick, brief tutorial over how to operate XYZ Mesh, but we do actually have a full documentation on all the features of XYZ Mesh on our main website, which if you scroll down on our main site all the way down to the FAQ, it's going to be the very first option, which is right here. How do I use XYZ Mesh? And we have an online user manual. If you click on that, it'll bring you to our page where it has every single feature laid out for you and what it does. To add to the tutorial window, the GPU graphing controls is a text document that also explains how to manipulate the graph back here. Pretty straightforward. We've already explained this in another video. Below the tutorial section is the activation window. Now the activation window is where you are going to be inputting your license key to activate your product to either a personal license, a business license, or a corporate license. You can also deactivate your license and reactivate it on another machine. With personal licenses, you can only have one machine active at a time. To be able to run your application on more than one machine, you will need to deactivate a machine before you transfer it to another machine, and all that can be done in this window. Simply input your license, deactivate it, go to your new machine, and reactivate it. There is no limitation on a personal license how many times you can deactivate or reactivate your license, but you will need to do this step in order to transfer your product from one machine to another. Business licenses come with up to 5 installs, so your license will work up to 5 times to activate it on a machine. After that, you will need to start deactivating and reactivating, the same as a personal license. And then corporate tier licenses, we have that set at a business-to-business basis. Typically, it is set at 10, so up to 10 installs, and after that, you'll have to purchase more licenses at your corporate level to be able to activate more computers. Underneath the activation is the reset defaults, which will do what it says. It will reset all of your settings back to default values. And then below that is the transfer settings. This option is left in from version 7 and 8 to allow you to transfer your file settings from version 6 or 7 into version 8, 9, or 10. G Drive Linker. G Drive Linker is the only safe and secure application that will allow you to create direct download links for your Google Drive files. It does not require you to actually log into your Google Drive account in order to create those download links. You can try it out today for free in the link down in the description, or if you would like to purchase the full version to get added content, you can use this promo code to get an extra 15% off. But this is only available for the first 50 users, so go ahead and grab it up today. The first thing we're going to look at is the display tab options. If you click on display, you're going to see the first option is axis. These 3 options right here indicate the X, Y, and Z axis arms that you see in the center of your plot. You can toggle them on and off to hide the various arms as needed. The next option below that is the ground layer or the grid. Now by default, this shows up as a white color. If it becomes a little bit difficult to see, you can change the size of your lines in the grid, or we can change the graph type, which we'll cover at a later time. The next option down is background. Background by default is left by gradient, which will automatically change to light or dark depending on if your data is able to plot within a gradient sphere. Light will give you a light background, and dark will give you a dark background. If at any time changing your plotting background, this happens where the display just disappears, all you have to do is rotate the graph and it'll automatically update. The next option below background is color effects, and this is where all the custom coloring comes into play. By default, the color variant is set by percentages. However, you can change this to other color settings. For instance, the lighting and shading, which is one we covered in a previous video, will allow you to change the color based on what you have selected down at the bottom. Color variant percentage will allow you to customize the colors based on a percentage range from the highest percentage being 100% to the lower percentage being 0%. We'll get to the custom coloring in a second. Color variant by values is exactly the same thing, except it will allow you to customize the colors based on values set in the Z-axis. No effect will simply just have it be the standard white color down here, very similar to the shading effect. However, shading and lighting will actually cast a shadow in darker areas, while no effect will just be a flat color. And finally, we're going to get to custom colors, and I'm going to change this back to variant percentage so we can better visualize this effect. If we go into color effects, and then go down to custom colors, it'll take a second for a window to load. However, whenever it does load, it will give us the options to customize our colors to any percentage that we want. On the left hand side, you can see a percentage range going from 100 to 0%, while on the right hand side, you're going to see the highest value down to the lowest value. You can change these colors to reflect on the graph at any certain point. For instance, if you want the 0% instead from being purple to be a lime green, you can change that, and now anything that is in between these two numbers, which is above 0% or 0%, is going to be lime green. Now anything from 0% to 10% is going to fall into the indigo, or we can change this to be gold. Now let's say that you really just botched this up and you hate the colors and you want to go back to the normals. Just click load defaults and it will load everything back to the default variations. It should also be noted that in the right hand side where you can customize the values, you can actually plug in any of these values that you want and it will customize it to that. But it does need to go from the highest value down to the lowest value, so this right here would not actually work, as 33 is not a greater number than 90. Below the color effects, we can go down to visual extras, which right now only has the bordering box. We do plan on adding more than this in the future, but for right now, the bordering box is simply a box that appears around your data so you could better gauge if all of it is being displayed. And below the visual effects is now the information window. The information window, which is also accessible down here, when you open that up, it will bring up a text document for you with a bunch of different calculations about your converted data. Now, depending on what kind of data you have on here, if it's a mesh format or if it's an XYZ format, you're going to have different data presented. By default, you're going to have your average of all the points, which is right here. How many points you have, the grid, the total mesh numbers, the lowest points, highest points, center points, as well as maximum and minimum for each of the values. You can also have a total volume calculation. Now this goes for the top volume and the bottom volume. This is calculated by taking the highest point versus the lowest point. So you have an above surface volume and a below surface volume. You'll also have the options here for the average slope for the plot that you have, as well as the highest slope and the lowest slope. Below that, you have the total points, as well as some more information about those. Moving over from the display, we can go to the graph types, and these are all the different graph types that you have available to you. Points will just simply plot points just like you did in the XYZ plotting. You can then drop that down to lines as well, which will plot lines going in order, and then mesh for a mesh grid. Surface is probably the one that most people are going to be using. Triangles is like a mesh, however, it is triangles instead of mesh. Heat will produce for you a flat graph, either solid or it will be a grid with no Z height variations, just simply colors. Single X and Y, which will only work when you convert to a mesh, will allow you to splice and only show a single line of data. And finally, the default input types. So whenever you first input data into the XYZ input or mesh input, it's going to allow you the option to automatically plot them as lines or points. By selecting either one of those, whenever you first plot data, it's going to populate the main graph here in that format. The same thing with the default graph convert. So as soon as you convert a graph over, you can choose which format you would like to populate the graph as. The next series of menu options we're going to look at is the graph options. If we click on that, the first thing we're going to see is a window state. A docked window is what you see right here, where the main graphing window is contained inside of XYZ Mesh. But if you'd like to have it floating so you can display it on a different monitor or window, you can click floating window. As you can see, the graph now disappears and it has appeared floating in its own window here. You can enlarge this to be any size that you want, and the graph will update accordingly. To get this back to the normal viewing area, you can either go to Graph, Window State, and Docked, or you can simply close out of the floating window and it will automatically appear back inside of XYZ Mesh. Below the window state is the origins. By default, the origin is set to auto, which is going to be right in the center of the arms of the X, Y, and Z coordinates. It averages out the center point between the X, Y, and Z heights to give you a central area. The origin is where you are going to be panning, zooming, rotating, and basically controlling the graph. Next is the reverse mouse order and reverse X and Y. Both of these reverse the way that the mouse operates while you are rotating and zooming around. Basically, these are the two options for inverting controls, like this. So inverted rotations. By default, both of these settings are left off. The next is auto zoom. This will automatically zoom in your converted data so you can see the whole data set. Now, if you would like to turn this off and customize your zoom, you can, but auto zoom is on by default as most users would be using this. And now we get to the final part of this video, which is the distance calculator. Now with the distance calculator, if you click on it the first time, you're going to see that it changes color and now says select the first point. What the distance calculator does is it will allow you to select points on your plotted area and it will give you information about those points. So for instance, if I was to select this highest point here, you can now see that the point is selected. You can see a little bit of a highlight around it. Let me change the width here so you can better see it. There, you can see that the point is selected. It also says on there to select the second point. Whenever I select a second point, it's going to come up with more information for me. So if I select this point, you can now see we have a line connecting the two, and the information window popped up on my other screen. If you scroll down, you can see that there's new values that have been input based on the points that you have selected. The starting point, which is the first point, and the second point here, the distance between them, and the calculated slope of the angle. If you'd like to clear this out, you could go to the menu options that we covered in the last video, or you can simply just click distance calculator again, and then click select the first point, and now it's cleared out. And believe it or not, that's pretty much it with XYZ Mesh. Now this video series might have went on for about an hour or so if you watch all of them together, but being able to run through a program from start to finish and looking at every single detail in less than an hour, it's pretty intuitive. If you'd like to try XYZ Mesh out for yourself, the link is in the description down below. I would like to thank you all for watching this video series. If there's anything else that comes up in a later video, we will be adding it to the playlist, so make sure you're subscribed. Thank you all very much, and until next time, have a great rest of your day.